COVID.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing, but we're working through it. How are you?
I'm also fine and keep training every day.
Very good, very good. So I have about 50 minutes, 50. Is that okay?
50. Okay. Yes.
Cool. Ready when you are.
I'm ready. So I will start with the first question and then I will do the introduction for this podcast. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. So the first question is how can knowing if you fast twitch dominant or slow twitch dominant change your training structure?
Training for hypertrophy?
Yes.
Okay. So is the question, how do you find out if you're
No.
fast twitch or slow twitch? It's if you
No.
know already, how does it
No.
change?
I mean like if you did some way or anything that let you know how that can help you change your training structure.
Okay. Good question. So I think that it can help you in a couple of ways, but you don't necessarily have to know if you're faster twitch or slower twitch because these um, differences will become obvious
Mhm.
once you start the training process. But if you know in advance somehow, or you've been trying to train without a lot of autoregulation, it can help to know. So there are a couple of differences with how faster twitch fibers behave versus slower twitch fibers. And some of them are a little bit more speculative than others, but some are very, very well established. Some of the well established ones are that faster fibers just don't tend to recover as quickly as slower fibers do. So, faster fibers, for that reason, usually require longer intervals, probably between sessions, maybe even between sets. So somebody that is training a muscle of theirs that is very fast twitch dominant may expect to have slightly longer breaks between sets
Mhm.
and potentially longer breaks between sessions. Um, so, for example, if you are very slow twitch dominant, then you may be able to train, let's say your back is more slow twitch than average. You may be able to train your back 4 times a week with overloading volumes per session, and that could be very sustainable for you for long periods of time. Whereas if you are intermediate twitch, sort of just 50-50 or the usual split between faster and slower fibers, maybe 3 times a week is more likely. And then if you are very, very fast twitch, depending on a couple other circumstances, then maybe something like 2 times a week is more likely. What I will say is there is good observational indication for this based on how high level pro bodybuilders train. Now, they train like this for a couple of reasons, some of them good and some not great. But most professional bodybuilders seem to have a very low frequency training where they train most muscle groups 1 to 2 times per week. And given that most of the highest level bodybuilders are very, very faster twitch dominant, that actually makes some sense. They may try to train more frequently and be unable to do so. Another interesting note, and there's not all the evidence is for this, but we have some suspicion to believe it's true, is that faster fibers may benefit from higher levels of tension, but less overall volumes
Mhm.
than slower fibers. But again, this would become apparent if you trained and noticed how big of a pump you got, how much soreness you got, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
It seems that faster fibers would benefit more from training it a little bit heavier, maybe more sets in the 5 to 10 rep range, fewer sets in the 20 to 30 rep range. So that could be another thing. And then actually, on the note of sort of rest times, faster fibers, when we mean recovery, it doesn't just mean from damage that they recover slower. They actually get inundated with metabolites faster. And thus, we have pretty good reason to believe that if you do occlusion training or you're doing a lot of drop sets where you do lots of work very close to failure with minimal rest, that probably doesn't target the faster twitch fibers nearly as much, and it probably targets the slower twitch fibers a little bit more. It makes a lot of mechanistic theoretical sense because the faster twitch fibers, when metabolites in the muscle, like during a drop set or during a set of occlusion, when these metabolites get really high, they tend to interfere with the contraction of faster twitch muscles more than they do with the contraction of slower twitch muscles. So it end up being that if you do a set of 40 repetitions occluded, the last 5 or 10 it might not actually be recruiting your fastest fibers a whole lot because they're just kind of done. And it might be recruiting more of your slower fibers, which is cool if you want to grow them. But if you have a muscle that is predominantly faster twitch, you may notice that training it with drop sets and all these sort of like set extension techniques that generate lots of metabolites might not result in the best responses. So now this isn't true for everyone, and it's not even certain to be true, but my suspicion is that people or muscles that have more faster twitch fibers than slower by, from the average, I think they probably benefit a little bit more from training that is just straight sets taken close to failure. So for example, a faster twitch muscle, you could do like 3 sets of, roughly 8 repetitions close to failure. That would really be a good stimulus. Whereas a slower twitch fiber might benefit proportionally more from doing the same 3 sets, but you rest 5 to 10 seconds in between them, and you do it drop set style, where you drop the load and get more reps and more reps and more reps. That might actually be able to target the slower twitch fibers a little bit better.
Okay, great answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a question. This question is on me, let's say.
Okay.
The last, let's say, before 2 weeks, I think 3 weeks, I finished my mesocycle that I did 9 weeks in row. This was very long. I didn't do any deload. So I started with 12 sets per muscle per week, and I finished it with 20 sets per muscle group per week. So on my 9th week, I was doing 20 sets.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started to do like a primer phase or maintenance phase, like 4 weeks. And now I am on the 3rd week. Now, what I did in the maintenance phase was more than half of the sets. Like I lowered more than half of the sets. I doing now like 8 sets per week.
Okay.
Instead of 20. You know what I mean? Like a very big drop. But what I tend to see in this 3 weeks that I started to grow, or I think to maintain more muscle, because I still dieting. Like I start to see better results from what I was doing in the 20 sets. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
now I am a little bit in a shock because like it's very low volume, but I started to do it with more intensity. Like I train 5 repetitions on the set and only 4 sets per muscle group per session. So how do you think
How are
this,
you seeing your better results? What are you using to say that you have better results?
like with my strength is going up very fast, and like I see the body fat. I don't know if this is like an illusion for harder muscle, or I just see like more body fat is shedding. Right?
Yeah. So
also I started to eat a little more calories because my goal was to maintain my lost body fat. You know what I mean? Like
yes.
yeah.
So there are actually it's a very common situation, and there are a couple of. Oh no, that's okay. Your English is perfectly fine. So this is a pretty common situation, and there could be a couple of things going on, and some of them might be going on at the same time. So
Mm.
the first one, which is, I would say, not very likely, but can play a role, is that for 9 weeks of high volume, that's a lot. And you
Yeah.
could have been in a state of excessive fatigue, excessive volume, such that towards the end you may have been losing muscle.
Mm.
And that now that you're training much lower volumes, you may be regaining muscle and even gaining some new muscle. So that's definitely possible. But it's more likely that you had an incredibly high level of fatigue and were growing muscle at the same time with that very high volume training towards the end. Here's the thing about high fatigue. High fatigue does two things at least, among many others. High fatigue results in the depletion of your intramuscular glycogen stores, which means that your muscle will appear smaller because it will be smaller because there's less glycogen in it. Secondly, high levels of fatigue tend to cause a stress response that results in some, at least some, deposition of water under your skin. Okay, now
Mm.
it's kind of everywhere, tends to be the edema, right? It's called water storage, but it
Yes.
also occurs under your skin, which makes you look fatter. Now, if we take those two things together, muscles that are smaller with the appearance of higher body fat, gee, that's a shitty look, right? So towards the end of that period of time that you did the 9 weeks, I would actually expect you to look bad, right? You're the worst you've looked in a while.
Mm.
So you might not have looked the worst you've looked in a while because you were losing lots of fat during that time and even building muscle. But
Right.
in order to see that that actually happened on your body, we would need to do two things: reduce subcutaneous water under the skin, and also increase intramuscular glycogen. Now, when you push your calories back up to maintenance in the last several weeks, when you reduce your training volumes by a lot, you reduce the fatigue that both burns your glycogen and you sort of restored your glycogen to some extent, and the fatigue that causes you to retain water. So, in addition to that, the fatigue, when you gain muscle from high volume training, if the training is sufficiently voluminous, you don't actually gain strength during that time because your fitness, which is the technical term for anything good that happens in training, and strength is one of them, is masked almost entirely by fatigue, right? It's like when you go on a long run, you get slower the longer you run. That doesn't mean you're losing the ability to run, you're just tired. So
Yeah.
when your fatigue falls off, when you switch to lower volumes, the muscle you gained now has a chance to express itself as more strength. So what you're documenting in your current journey is essentially you did a giant overreaching phase, and now you're doing what is essentially a taper in periodization, and you're
Mhm.
seeing all of these incredible things. But I will say, unless you were really overdoing it with 9 weeks and 20 sets per week, which I think you might have been, but maybe not, the vast majority of what's happening now, the good things that you're noticing from doing 8 sets per week and eating more food, those were not caused by doing 8 sets per week and eating more food.
Ah,
They
it's
were
so.
caused by the preceding phase, and now they're being realized. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 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 of course. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Thank you for the very informative answer.
You bet. And just to make sure that the viewers of your podcast here get a little
Yeah.
bit of extra insight, delayed adaptations and the ability of fatigue to mask fitness is
Mhm.
one of the reasons why it's very difficult to put cause and effect together on what you're doing differently in your training and how it's affecting your training. In exercise science, they actually have a specific time between the various things they do to try to see a difference in order for this stuff to go away and for the time to expire so that the changes made are actually the ones being observed. And it's called a washout period, where they expect some things to continue to change for a while and then later they measure. So, I've what you just told me, that lower volumes are sort of better than higher volumes. I have heard and experienced myself numerous times, but we have to be vigilant and not conclude that, if I just keep doing sets of 8 forever, I'll get even better results,
Mhm.
which
So,
probably won't happen.
so you think, let's say, if I continued with my low volume, like 8 sets per week,
Mhm.
and I continued to increase my strength, you think that this in the long term will stop sometime, like I will plateau with the hypertrophy?
Yes, absolutely. So
And
I suspect that you're probably not getting much hypertrophy from doing 8 sets per week. I think
right,
the strength gain is mostly due to the
yes,
falling fatigue and the increasing ability of the nervous system under low fatigue to
uh-huh.
express its strength with a new muscle. So what if if these next couple of weeks you're going to keep getting stronger, and then a couple of weeks after that maybe you'll get a little less strong and less strong, or you still be gaining strength but not as quickly. Then, when you're nice and reduced in fatigue and you're ready to go, I think I would advise for another progressive high
It's
volume
like,
phase and mesocycle. Yep. And then you return back. And that is really, you and I just rediscovered periodization together. That's what periodization is. You push for a while, then you come back. You push, then you come back. It's not, I think a lot of folks are looking for one program and one approach they can do over and over and over and get their best results. That just doesn't seem to be the reality.
so you think, like, after this period, let's say of the 4 weeks or 3 weeks, like now I'm on my third week, you think that after, like, let's say I will start my next mesocycle on the next week. So this week should be the deload week. You know what I mean? Like I have to deload after this low volume, high intensity, or I can start the hypertrophy block, right? Like
Yeah.
immediately.
Right. Good question. So, something that James Hoffman and I say, and you know him from the RP webinars,
Yeah. Yeah.
is is that, and he's a sort of really big expert on recovery, is deloading. If you have the option to deload or not, deloading is usually the best way to go, because the worst case is that you took a couple of extra days of relaxation that you didn't need.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. You're 3 days behind your lifetime plan of getting as jacked as possible. The thing is, if you should have taken a deload but don't, then it could mess up your entire next mesocycle progression, and you'll still have to deload anyway. So it'll save you zero time and possibly risk a lot more. And worse than time alone, it could risk injury and so on and so forth. So we say, even after maintenance phase, take a deload, really let your body drop tons of fatigue, really let your body relax, and then you're just that much more likely to have a super productive phase. It's kind of like, if I can make an analogy, let's say you're going to be going out, um, to you're going to a new city to as a tourist, as a traveler, to explore, and you have 2 days in the city, after a long travel. Let's say it's a multiple part journey, and you just flew and took a bus and took a taxi cab for like 20 hours, and then this next day is starting, and you have 2 days to really explore the city, and you know that one of the days you're going to need a break, and then one other of the days you're going to really want to look at stuff. The question is, when do you take a break? Well, if you say, look, we're here, we just arrived, let's go explore right now. Well, you're going to be exploring with 20 hours of travel fatigue. You just might not get to all the places you want. You might have to quit halfway through, or you'll be so tired, you're like, great, this is a stupid monument of some guy. I don't even care anymore. I just want to go to sleep. And then, okay, so your rest afterwards is fine, but you didn't really get a lot out of your trip. On the other hand, if you just went 20 hours, even if you feel pretty good, because, after 20 hours of travel, you can feel pretty good for a couple of more hours, but you're going to crash later. What you can do then is, since you have one day of city exploring, but you have 2 days in that city, take that first day and really relax, sleep a lot, whatever, eat, and then next day you'll be so refreshed, you'll for sure have a great time exploring the city, because you're so super ready, and there's no chance that you're going to be quitting halfway through or having a bad rap. And I'll tell you this, Mike, I'm telling you this both as a sports scientist and as somebody who's tried this like a trillion times. Every single time I take a nice, long, full deload, I have an amazing mesocycle after, even a training block. But every time I'm like, man, because none of us want to deload. You didn't start lifting weights because you like deloading. You started lifting weights because you like to train hard. So sometimes I'll be like, you know what, I'm going to end my deload 2 days early. And every single time at the end of that mesocycle, sometimes in the middle, I go, God damn it, I should have never done that.
Right. Okay, great. But what I mean was like, if if you do like deload for high volume training, you always take, let's say, the third or the half of this volume, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
start your week like the first half of the week is with lower sets but high intensity, and then you will
Mm-hmm.
do the other half low sets and low intensity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say after this maintenance phase that is low volume from the beginning, you also take half of these sets. Like instead of 8 sets, I will do the deload with 4 sets. You know what I mean? Per week.
Mm-hmm. So that's a good question. There's one of two ways to go about it. The first way is you say, okay, my volume's already low enough.
Yes.
What I'm going to do is I'll just normal half week at 8 sets. And then the second half of the week, I'll also do 8 sets or whatever, 4 and 4. And then, but I'll just go really light. So that's option number one,
Mhm.
is to keep that volume 8 sets. Option number two is an interesting one. This is plenty of research done on how low a volume you can actually do and still have a retention of muscle and a retention of fitness and so on and so forth. And it's pretty clear that it's very, very low. It's not half, it's a third or less of your regular volume. So another option is to do like
Just a
four to,
question. Just a quick to be clear. Like you mean from your regular volume with your mesocycle of hypertrophy or the maintenance
yes,
cycle?
regular mesocycle of hypertrophy. So if your average is, say, 15 sets,
Uh-huh.
right,
Okay.
per week on
Yeah.
hypertrophy, then as few as 5 or less sets per week is almost certainly more than enough to conserve muscle and can drop that much more fatigue.
Mhm.
So that's probably an even better option is instead of doing 8 sets that week, do a total of 4 to 6, total of 5 sets. First
Uh-huh.
half of the week heavy, second half very light, 50% of your normal weights. And then you will have two things. One, you will for sure drop more fatigue like that than you would if you just did 8 sets. And two, you will almost certainly conserve 100% of the muscle that you were going to conserve with 8 sets. If you've read, and I believe you have, we have a book called How Much Should I Train?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
About the
I read.
training. Mhm.
Yeah.
It's about the training volume landmarks. And one thing it says is for more advanced athletes and it's even intermediates, there's often a big zone, a big space between their maintenance volume and their minimum effective volume. And I think 8 sets per week might actually fall in that sort of range. And then at that point, it's kind of like, if you're going to do 8 sets, the lowering to 5 has no effect on maintaining because 5 is still at maintenance or above, just like 8. And you don't get anything more out of 8, but 8 for sure prevents as much fatigue from being dropped as 5. So I would say go even lower, go to 5 or so sets, and that's probably the best bet.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
You bet.
So for the next question. So when we say that going to failure on high reps equals the hypertrophy of low reps with heavy weights, I'm talking if we equalize the number of sets, okay? So
Mm-hmm.
does this hypertrophy come from myofibrillar growth or it may be sarcoplasmic hypertrophy?
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of answers to this. One is we don't really know,
Mhm.
because the entire concept of sarcoplasmic versus myofibrillar hypertrophy is still so mysterious that
Mhm.
we can't be very certain. So part one is we're not sure. Part two is every amount of growth that you get in the medium term. What I mean by that is the short term is days and a week, the medium term is weeks and months, and the long term is months and years. So in the medium term, like think about it like a mesocycle. Every growth you get in a mesocycle is always and everywhere to some extent hyper. It's myofibrillar and it's sarcoplasmic. Okay, it's some combination of both.
Okay.
Now, are higher repetitions more likely to increase the sarcoplasm? Well, maybe. Although, if the muscles are producing tension, and if it's slower twitch muscles that perhaps hypertrophy more from higher reps anyway, then maybe not, right? On the other hand, people talk about faster twitch fibers being stimulated more by heavy training, and also heavy training grows more myofibrillar hypertrophy rather than sarcoplasmic. Well, an interesting thing is that faster fibers actually have a huge sarcoplasm, technically sometimes bigger by ratio than slower twitch fibers, and the potential for sarcoplasmic growth in faster fibers is huge. So there's not really a very, very compelling reason to think that higher reps grow more sarcoplasm and lower reps grow more myofiber. That might end up being the case, but we don't have much reason to suspect that it's the case currently. So I wouldn't guess one way or another for the time being.
Uh-huh. Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So the next question will be, what you think will be better for beginner to start with if his goal at end is bodybuilding? Do you recommend starting hypertrophy training first or start with strength and then to use his new weights that he gained, I mean the training weights, with
Mm-hmm.
the strength program and to put it in the hypertrophy program for more volume?
Sure. So that's a really good question. And I have just recorded a lecture. It'll be out on RP Plus
Uh-huh.
maybe in a couple of months. Um, it's part of the Advanced Hypertrophy Concepts and Tools lecture series that's coming out right now.
Yeah, yeah.
And the entire lecture is on the career progression and what to best do. What do beginners have to do differently than intermediates and the advanced, and how to best progress, through your career. And I will explain this, what I'm about to say, in greater depth. But the shorter answer is that is the beginning of a power and
Ju-
bodybuilding
ju-
career
Just a minute.
actually look.
Say it again because the sound not
That's
good.
okay.
Yeah,
Better
thank you.
now?
Yeah, yeah, it's better.
Okay. The beginnings of a powerlifting and bodybuilding career actually look very, very similar.
Mm,
So, and it's not because, it's like, oh, it's a coincidence. It's because both powerlifters and bodybuilders, even at the very beginning stages, if they want to optimize, need to do a couple of things, and they both need to do these things. One is that they need to establish their basic technique.
mm,
And two, they need to establish this technique in the fundamental core movements and be able to have some strength and stability to take into all the other different exercises they'll ever do. So the best way to do this is relatively moderate volumes of sets of roughly 5 to 10 reps, pretty far from failure, 2 to 4 reps in reserve or something like that in most cases. And even that's pretty hard training towards the end of the beginner stage in an ideal model. So because, so it's sets of 5 to 10 reps, and with heavy emphasis on getting the technique correct, mostly in core exercises like squats and deadlifts and bench presses. The small difference between bodybuilder training and powerlifter training at the beginner stage is that bodybuilders will spend a bit more of their volume on muscles that powerlifters will spend less or none. For example, upright rows, curls, more tricep work for the arms and shoulders, and then more vertical pulling for the lats, and some calf work in addition to that. So those are exercises and muscle groups that beginner bodybuilders will do, but they'll still do them with sets of roughly 5 to 10 reps with meticulous attention to perfect technique, trying to establish that base. After the first year or two of that, very similar training between powerlifters and bodybuilders, powerlifters are going to go off and start their first strength phases of sets of, 3 to 6 repetitions, right? Whereas after that, bodybuilders will start to diversify their training into more specific hypertrophy training by starting to do sets of 5 to 10, and now more sets of 10 to 20, especially in more isolated exercises, and eventually 20 to 30 even later in their careers. So that bifurcation doesn't occur for 1 to 3 years, depending on the circumstance. And the only real difference between powerlifting and bodybuilding training is that powerlifters are going to have a little bit less diversity of their exercises, a bit less vertical pulling, a bit less shoulder work and arm work and calf work, whereas beginner bodybuilders will have a little bit more of that.
Great answer. Okay,
Thanks.
so another question. When you start structuring program, you start by deciding how many hard sets you will do, and then the frequency comes, right? Like we will decide how much the total volume will be, and then we will start with the frequency according to the volume.
I think
More or
that's
less, like
you can do it like that. I would start with a number of hard sets per session, and then after that, I would decide how many sessions.
yeah, that's what I meant. Okay, so for beginners, is once per week frequency will be better than twice per week frequency if we want to do 4 to 5 total sets?
No.
Because we know that the minimum set per session for good results should be from 3 to 8, maybe 10.
So that's not for beginners. That's for intermediates. So beginners have slightly different recommendations. Beginners can grow very well from 1 set per session. Okay, so all of a sudden that's out the window. But there's another concern with beginners that's a bit more interesting. Remember, actually, this is a great question to ask because I just answered the one on beginner training. Remember, the big emphasis I just mentioned on beginner training is learning how to do the techniques properly. For example, if someone doesn't know how to do a deep squat with a rigid torso, they're not going to be able to hack squat properly or lunge or leg press or basically do anything else, right? If they don't know how to do a barbell bent over row, they're going to suck at every other pulling movement. So it's important to have really, really good technique. The thing is, technique training is optimized at relatively high frequencies, but low numbers of exposures per session, numbers of sets in this case. So if you have 6 sets per week of squats and you want to teach a beginner to do them as best as possible, once a week, 6 sets is the worst way to do it. Okay. Twice a week, 3 sets is a good way to do it. 3 times a week, 2 sets is probably the best way to do it. But I will say there's a constraint. So that's fundamentally it, which is why higher frequency per muscle programs work better for beginners. I will say that there's a bit of a warning here, a bit of a caveat. And the warning is this: if you can overdo it a little bit with beginners on total weekly session number. Not like how many times you train your biceps, but how many times you go to the gym. And this is something else we cover in the Advanced Hypertrophy Concepts and Tools lecture. Beginners will tell you, I'm really hardcore. I want to train 7 times a week. They don't know that they're lying, but they're lying because they can't survive it. And they have a very high chance of burning out. I've seen it tons of times. So even if beginners say, hey, I want to train 6 times a week or whatever, it's probably best to recommend to them to train 2 to 4 times per week total, probably like 2 to 3. And then if after a few, because remember, beginners, and people sometimes forget this because beginners say, I want optimum results. You're going to get great results no matter what you do because you're a beginner. So 2 to 3 sessions per week of lifting lets you get great results as a beginner, and it can show you what you're getting yourself into as a beginner. And if you really like it and you fall in love with it, after a few months, your coach, who's got your best interests long term in mind, can ask you, hey, how is this going? You say, dude, I love training 3 times a week. I'm addicted to it. I can't wait to train more. After 6 months of training, you can say, let's try 4 days a week. And you try 4 and they love it and they get even more gains and so on and so forth. Then once they're an intermediate, you can say that they can train 5 days a week and eventually 6. So while it's good for beginners to have a higher frequency per muscle group, we have to make sure not to let them get too frequent as far as session number is concerned, because then they get ahead of themselves. And a lot of times they overreach and overtrain, if nothing else, but psychologically. So if you put 2 and 2 together, that actually means that beginner programs start to look like whole body programs every day. Because if you come to the gym 3 times a week, and we also just said each muscle should be trained pretty close to as often as possible to get the technique very well developed. Well, gee, that's your whole body 3 times a week, which is totally fine. It's absolutely not the best way to train advanced people for many reasons, but it absolutely is the best way to train beginners.
Great. So if I want to, let's say, to build a sample for a beginner program, it should be look like from 2 to 3 sets per session per exercise, let's say, and 3 times per week, 2 to 3 times per week.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And the good news is that
yeah,
if you use the right exercises, which are more compound,
yeah,
multiple muscle joint exercise or multiple muscle and multiple joint exercises, you get a lot of muscles trained with a few exercises. Like, they don't need to do an infinite number of curls for biceps,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
after they've done pull-ups and bent over rows, you might do one set of biceps once a week or twice a week, and they still grow their arms like crazy. And that's a real big difference between training people for long-term development and training them for short-term improvement. If somebody wants as big of an arm as possible in 6 months, which is a funny goal for a beginner, then of course you're going to train them more conventionally with lots of high-frequency arm training specifically. But if someone's interested in long-term development, you can cover a lot of bases with the compound movements.
Great. Okay, so with the beginners program, you also have to struct, let's say, like mesocycle, or you can do the same program for long term and then to start increasing the volume, and then you can do the mesocycles. Know what I mean?
So
Like,
you do mesocycles right from the beginning, but you are correct in what you said, that the mesocycles will be longer, sometimes much longer. So for example, you can train a beginner without deloading, right? An accumulation phase
yeah,
that lasts 12 weeks, 16 weeks, 20 weeks perhaps,
mhm,
as long as their fatigue is low and they're gaining great ground strength-wise, technique-wise, and they're really enjoying themselves, you can keep going. At some
yeah,
point, their fatigue will get a little bit higher, and their strength is now pretty impressive relative to what it was. They might start to exhibit some not ideal technique in the gym because the weights are heavier and because they are more tired. At that point, you definitely want to have them still deload. And because beginners really usually don't like to take a week off of training, because they're like, wait a minute, I started training 4 months ago. Now you want me to take a week off? I'm in the groove. You don't have to have them take a week off. You just train them normally, but with slightly lower volumes in the first half of the week. And in the second half of the week, either you give them a day or two off, or you train them just like a normal deload, very light. And they get pissed. They're like, damn it, I don't even feel like I'm training hard. And you say, great, you're going to need to train hard for another 4 months. So save your anger for the next week And then usually they drop fatigue so quickly that just 1 week of deloading, they can do another whole mesocycle that's 8 or 12 or 16 weeks long or whatever.
Great. And the primary method to progress with the beginners should be the weights, not the sets, right?
So the thing is with set numbers is that you can quickly cause a lot of adaptation, but also a lot of fatigue, which isn't great because it interferes with learning of the movements. And also, a lot of set numbers can be psychologically overwhelming because all of a sudden, geez, their workouts are 2 hours long. Maybe they didn't sign up for that. In addition to that, they're getting so strong so fast that you can make very meaningful increases in mathematical volume, sets times reps times weights times distance, by increasing the load on the bar. Because if your weight goes up by 10%, it's a big volume jump. That's like for an advanced athlete adding 2 sets per week or something like that. So for beginners, they start out with a very low number of sets. And interestingly enough, they're going to add some sets over the first few weeks. Because when I say they start with a low number of sets, you literally have them start with one hard working set. Okay, but that's a bit of an illusion, so we might as well dive into this. I suppose I'm on the podcast to dive into detail. Here's what you want to do with beginners. You basically have them do 3 sets of an exercise from day one, but that's not 3 working sets. 2 of those sets are sets with just their body weight or just the bar, in squats, for example, purely for technical practice. Still sets of 5 to 10, but they're like 20 RIR or even higher than that, right? So these sets are just practice sets. They don't do a lot of physiological disruption, but they're great for motor learning. So then once they do those sets in the first week, they're going to, at the end of those 3 sets, their last set is an actual working set. Now here's some weight on the bar. There you go. Here's a challenge. The next week, they may still only do 3 total sets, but now you might do 2 working sets and only 1 pure technical set. The week after that, they might still do only 3 working sets, but they may do 3 actual working sets. Sorry, they may do 3 total sets. 3 actual working sets after warm-ups are over 0 pure technical sets on top of warm-ups. And then at the end of that, on the 4th week, or 5th week or 6th week, you might add a set if you notice that their technique looks excellent, they look crisp, they're getting through the workouts quickly, and it's just not very challenging to them to only do 3 sets. But after you get up to that 3, 4, 5 set per exercise per session range or per muscle group per session, you want to make sure that most of the rest of the volume increases come from the load increases. But as they become more advanced, after a year of training, you might take them from 3 sets at the beginning of mesocycle and not end at 4 or 5, but end at, 6 or 7 or 8. Push it a little bit further, so long as they're staying to roughly 2/3 of their maximum recoverable volume before you deload, in order to not make them so fatigued that their technical abilities, their abilities to use good technique, are interfered with. That number, 2/3 of MRV, is going to be declining every single mesocycle. So you can do a little bit more volume and a little bit more and a little bit more, but primarily, so you increase the volume very slowly, but the load on the bar goes up pretty rapidly. Last thing I'll say is, for beginners, the number 1 goal is technique, and the number 2 goal is adherence, psychologically especially. So what you definitely don't want to do is push the load too far, where their technique starts to break down and where they start to really be afraid of training because they fail so much, because it's so difficult, because they're not hitting PRs, because you tried to get them to do a weight they couldn't do for the number of reps you wanted. You want to be on the easier side, progress in load only if their technique works. Let me give you a quick example of that. Let's say you're in week 6 of teaching them squatting, and they're doing 4 working sets of squats. If in week 6, on the 4th set, to get the reps that they wanted, their technique started to break down, you do not use more weight in week 7. You repeat the weight that they did, and you figure, well, geez, it's going to be easier because it's the same weight, but they've got an adaptation. So won't they just have an easy time in week 7? Well, if it's an easy enough time, they'll do all 4 sets in week 7 with really good technique. And you go, okay, great. Next week, we add a little bit of load. In other words, lifters that are beginners have to earn their load progressions by demonstrating good technique. The reason that's not a thing for intermediates and advanced is under the surface, it really is a thing, but intermediates and advanced should never be sacrificing technique, and they know they shouldn't be doing that.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, thank you. Great answer.
Thanks.
You are helping me a lot with this because I am opening my own gym in our village, and
Wow, good for you.
yeah, thank you. And this is the first gym in our village. We don't have, so I'm the first one, and I'm the only one that follows the science behind the training in our village.
That's awesome. Well, they're going to get a
Yes,
lot of jacked people coming out of that village.
yeah, yeah. So you are helping me a lot with this.
Well,
So
it's my pleasure. I probably have time for one more question.
okay. Although I want to tell you how much. Just a minute. I have more like 9 questions. So I will ask you one, and the other we will do on other podcast.
Sure.
Okay. So let me choose one that it's very informative to get answer. Uh, okay. So what is your best method to check body fat as a starting point, although none of the methods is accurate?
Mm-hmm. Great question. You know, if you're RP Plus, the hypertrophy concepts, advanced hypertrophy concepts and tools lecture series, there's going to be 32 total lectures.
Mhm.
You are going to love some of the later ones. There's an entire lecture on estimating body fat. It's like an hour long.
Great.
So I'll give you the short synopsis here.
Today I have watched your last one.
Very cool. Which one was that? Do you remember the number
Uh,
or the
hi-
topic?
high excessively high frequencies.
Ah, very cool. Okay, great. Wow, those should be coming up pretty soon because we're getting through them really well.
Yeah.
So, okay, measuring body fat. You're absolutely correct that accuracy is really, really crap.
Yeah.
There are 2 primary reasons to measure body fat at the beginning of a program. One is to give the person a reference value for how lean or not how lean or not lean they really are, just as a general idea. If they have a time scale for some objective things. So for example, if you say to yourself, you start training, you're in this village, you hire Michael Karam, and you say, I want to get in shape, I want abs. What you as the coach would say is, maybe we should do some kind of validated scientific test for body fat that gives you a ballpark figure so we know roughly how far you are away from abs. To put
Mhm.
this in perspective, abs for males occur somewhere between 10 and 15% fat. Most people will start to see their abs. And for females, somewhere between 22 and 15%. So if someone asks you, hey, how long is the timetable for me getting abs? If you don't know their body fat percent remotely, it's going to be a very tough guess. So what you can do is say, get a DEXA or a bod pod or even someone experienced who has done many, many skin folds. They can do your skin fold calipers, and they can tell you roughly, look, within 3 or 5% error, what your body fat is. And all of those tests do that just fine. So for example, you could have an individual that is, let's say, a male, and he's 17% body fat. You can look him right in the face and say, if you give me 12 to 16 weeks and your willpower for a hypocaloric diet and weight training, I can very likely give you abs, right? Because it's only 17%. Like, for the love of God, as he gets to 13, he may be like, holy shit, I'm starting to see my abs. If you have, however, another person, also a male, just to keep the examples consistent, and he has 27% body fat, imagine Michael, when do people in Israel go for holiday, for vacation? Is it August usually?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's July, August.
July, August. So let's say he comes to you in 27% fat. He comes to you in April now, and he says, "Michael, how can you get me in shape? I'm going to France in August. I want abs." With 27% fat, you're going to be like, "Look, man, I can't lie to you. It's very, very unlikely. You know, we can get you in much better shape, but maybe if you go back to France during the winter holidays, New Year's and Christmas and Hanukkah, maybe then you can have abs, right? But this is just very, very far away." So that's reason number one you could be getting a body fat test, is to just see how far you are from various objective realities. A similar one, and this is a similar idea, just different scope, people trying to target bodybuilding or fitness competitions. If someone says, "I want to be a competitive bodybuilder, I want to compete in my first show," a good body fat test at the beginning of that process can really tell you, look, are they 16 weeks out or are they 32 weeks out? And that's going to need to be two diets. Second reason we estimate body fat is for tracking progress week to week, month to month. Unfortunately, every single one of the body fat tests, the formal ones, are out of the picture because their error is too high. They just don't have enough granularity to tell you week to week if you're improving or changing.
Right.
There, we use different measurements. One decent one is to take an abdominal skin fold, only the abdominal, right next to the belly button, and
Mm.
skin fold yourself several times a week, every week. That skin fold is going to be some number of millimeters, like 25 or 13, and it's not going to correspond at all to your overall body fat because you'd have to skin fold the rest of your body to find out what that is, and then the error rate's really high. But if you do that multiple times a week, every week, just from one site, it might go 15, 15, 14, 14, 13, 12, 12, 12, 11. And as long as it's going in that direction of down, you know you're losing fat. Combine that with scale measurements, and you really know you're losing fat. Now, how much were you at the beginning? How much are you at the end? Who knows? But you know you're making progress, right? It's like you may not know where you are on a map when you're driving your car, but if the odometer says you're 5 kilometers and now you drove 6 kilometers and now you drove 7 kilometers, you know you're getting somewhere, right? And if you're generally driving in the right direction, if you didn't change from the road you were supposed to be on, then you know all is well in that capacity, right? So that's an interesting approach. You don't have to do the skin fold caliper. You can do a pretty similar thing with can you still hear me, by the way?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, awesome. You can do a pretty similar thing with just visual appearance, how somebody looks in the mirror, and the scale. If you are training with weights, especially for beginners and intermediates, you're not going to see muscle losses if their nutrition and sleep are remotely normal. You just won't, because they're probably gaining muscle anyway. So if someone has hired you to transform their physique in 16 weeks, if they're losing weight consistently, they're almost certainly losing body fat. There's just no way around it. And if they look different every 2 weeks, it's a big deal, and you can put that to the bank. Another one is how their clothes fit or how their belt fits. A lot of times people will lose, 8 centimeters off their waist in 3 months. That is obvious. So you can use the caliper test several times a week for more particular measurements, but nothing beats the mirror, the scale, and how your clothes fit for every several weeks. If your clothes are looser, if the scale is down, and if you look a little leaner in the mirror, we don't have to do a body fat test because we know you're on the right track.
Right. So great. But I have one small question.
Sure.
It's related to what you told me right now. Like, if we take the first part, when you say that if someone come to you with 27 and you know already that you have a long way to go with this
Mm-hmm.
person, but when you are saying he is 27, how do you know if this is accurate 27? You know what I mean? Like,
Sure. You don't. So if you go to a DEXA, get them go to a hospital or some kind of clinic, and they get a DEXA scan,
yeah, yeah.
then we know it's probably 2 or 3% away. So they could be like 24, they could be 30, but you know they're not 12, right?
Okay, okay.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
for the other ones,
And for
skinfold
the
and
BIA, let's say, for the BIA scale.
so the BIA is a problem. The
Yeah.
BIA has calculates entirely off of formula.
Mhm.
So it doesn't actually measure your body fat in any meaningful way. It does send an electric current through your body, and it assumes a lot of things. The BIA is great for comparing groups of people in who's fatter and who's leaner, and it's great for monitoring changes. So if one group was given a fat burner pill and another group was not, it was given a placebo, and the fat burner pill group, on the BIA average lost 3% more body fat, we can conclude from that. But as far as accuracy, seeing if a person really is 27% fat, the BIA is absolute dog shit. And the reason you know it's dog shit is this. Many, many BIAs, maybe most now, have two buttons you can press, okay?
Right.
One button says normal, and the
Yeah.
other button says
Athlete.
athlete.
Right.
I mean, Michael, this is insane. So, like, the one button you press changes the body fat by 10%. Like, if you've trained for 4 years in CrossFit, are you an athlete or are you normal? What if someone comes in and hasn't really trained much, but they already have a six pack? Which one are they? It's ridiculous. They're ridiculous completely. You just have to press one of them, the same one every time, and then it gives you reliable measurements. It kind of acts like a skin fold on your abdominal region,
It's good for
week to week.
tracking, say, for the same person, let's say.
Exactly. And Michael, I'll tell you this, it's not even that good for that. It's just not terrible for that. So you can use it in research studies on groups. I would still use a skin fold even if I was tracking a person, because skin fold actually measures your physical fat tissue, at least in one part of your body.
And
So
and like, can you give me a number, let's say, on how much accurate the skin fold will be? Like,
yeah,
I mean for the tracking, I mean for the
for
let's say,
accuracy,
yeah.
if you have a good skin fold operator, 2 to
And I want
4%.
you to recommend to me some of them. Like, I want to buy one because of
No, no,
this.
no, no. They all work well. I mean, the person who uses them has to be
Okay.
trained to operate them properly, and that means thousands of hours of doing them. So a huge operator error. A good operator, 2 to 4%. A bad operator, 10, 12% error. So
And the BIA, let's say, of the accuracy part for the BIA, it's
three to
always
five percent.
3 to 5 lower or above of what you are.
We don't know. Both.
Okay.
Yeah, 3 to 5 up and down.
So
So
not
it
to
could,
use it is better.
say that again.
So not to use it is better.
That is a. I may change my stance on this eventually, but my entire career, I have been very against BIA, and I will continue to be unless shown better evidence. And big recommendation for those listening to your podcast and you as well is to look into weightology.net, run by
Yeah,
James
yeah, yeah.
Krieger.
James Krieger,
He
yeah.
has a huge number of talks and research papers
Mhm.
on the different body fat assessment methods and the different kinds of error they have. If you look at his stuff, even DEXA's not that great. BIA is like a sick joke, in my opinion.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
Cool.